Despite the flourish of subsurface engineering, drilling, and power plant innovations emerging from teams globally, geothermal projects are only viable if there is an off-taker for the produced power or heat. In other words, there needs to be an entity who will purchase the geothermally derived heat or electrons at a price point that makes the project economically viable. Off-takers are typically utilities, and in some places, utilities are familiar with and accustomed to purchasing geothermal power and heat. But in most places globally, because geothermal currently has such a small global footprint, utilities are unfamiliar with geothermal and are thus slow to engage with geothermal projects. In other instances, because geothermal has been geographically limited, historically to traditional hydrothermal projects, geothermal development is often remote and therefore not located near population centers or utility grid connections, adding significant costs to projects. As new scalable geothermal concepts are developed and demonstrated, allowing geothermal projects to increasingly co-locate near population centers and grid connections, new utility players have begun to show interest in geothermal's clean baseload capability. There are, however, other entity types who are emerging as fast-moving early adopters of geothermal. These unconventional off-takers, including private landowners, ranchers, corporate entities in need of a secure, clean, and baseload source of electricity, and even governments and municipalities, are quickly becoming geothermal's early adopters. So, who are these entities? Why are they betting on geothermal as a clean energy source to support their operations? And what can utilities learn from their fast moves into the space? Let's explore.
Well, hello and welcome back, everyone. My name is Matt Welch, and I'm the Executive Vice President of the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance. I'm thrilled to be the moderator for today's very non-technical, no acronyms allowed panel as a break from the other 2 days we had and enjoyed. We're going to talk about Bitcoins, municipalities, military bases, and Texas ranches. And I know you're asking yourself right about now, what in the world could all these things possibly have in common? Well, the truth is that in varying degrees, these players are early adapters of geothermal energy. That's why today's theme is appropriately titled Ready to Launch. The folks we're talking with today are modern day pioneers of the energy frontier and represent the tip of the drill bit, so to speak, on our path to geothermal progress. Some of today's panelists are getting up to speed in the geothermal space, and others are sprinting to the front of the line. So I'd like to welcome our panelists to the virtual stage and introduce our first guest, James McAllen. James is an 8th generation Texan and the patriarch of the McAllen Ranch, his family's 230-year-old cattle ranch, one of the oldest continuously owned ranching properties in the United States. Let me start off by saying that rural farmers and ranchers of today have serious challenges confronting their very traditional way of life. And as James well knows, it's forcing some diversification and outside the box thinking about their future. James and his family have already embraced renewable energy in the form of a 1 megawatt solar array built in 2018. This asset generates clean, renewable power for a local electric co-op and provides a steady revenue stream for the McAllen Ranch. James, you've been quoted as saying cattle alone won't sustain the ranch, not anymore. And that, quote, geothermal could be the future of ranching. Why do you think that? And what's in store for the future of the McAllen Ranch?
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, that's true. The cattle can't sustain the ranch alone. We look at all the resources on the ranch, everything that might be available to us, whether that be solar, wind. We look at the soils, we look at the grass, the water, and in this case, we look at geothermal. It's a very exciting time. We're very successful with our solar construction. It was one of the very first what I call rancher-owned solar arrays. It wasn't a third party that came in and constructed this solar array. This is one that my family purchased and arranged a PPA with a local utility, and we sell them electricity from the ranch, and it's been wonderfully successful. We, that is my job on the ranch, is to continuously look for other resources. And geothermal was brought to my attention by a good friend of mine about 5 years ago, and the potentials that lie under McAllen Ranch, and then was actually confirmed by a nephew of mine who was a petroleum engineer at the University of Texas at Austin. Came to me and talked to me about a class that he had one day in Austin, and they were talking about the ranch and all the geothermal properties that were underneath the ranch. I'd never heard of this before, and looked into a paper that was written by the Department of Energy in the University of Texas back in 1978. And sure enough, McAllen Ranch was named as one of the best places in the state of Texas for the potentials of geothermal production. So that got me really excited, and that's how I ended up here today.
So tell us about your partnership with Sage Geosystems and what's on the horizon for your partnership.
Right. So after we finished the construction of the solar array, we developed a really excellent relationship with the local utility, which is Magic Valley Electric Co-op. And they operate here in deep South Texas, what we call the Rio Grande Valley. And I got together with the contractor of that project, now partner, Richard Estrada, and we started constructing other smaller solar arrays around in the Rio Grande Valley. We have one that we finished this past year in the city of McAllen, a 5 megawatt array, and then some other arrays that we propose to build here at the end of this year. So that led us into learning about this paper that was written by the Department of Energy, and looking into this potential. I talked to Richard, my partner, about this and said, look, I think this is something that we need to look into, and we should go out and start contacting some geothermal companies. As you may know, there's not many of them out there, and we found Sage Geosystems right there in our backyard. They were working on a test well in Starr County, which is the neighboring county to us, probably maybe 25-30 minutes from the ranch. So we contacted them and got to know each other, and we're very excited about the prospects that laid ahead. So what we ended up doing is signing a joint venture agreement with Sage Geosystems to build the very first hot dry rock geothermal electrical facility at McAllen Ranch. And we are currently working on a pilot project of about 3 megawatts, which we hope to scale up to 300 megawatts. Very excited about this project, which we call MAC-GT1, by the way.
That's awesome. That is great news. Just want to touch on one facet, and that is land stewardship. For your family's ranch to last for 230 years, I'm sure that's a heavy responsibility. You are the expert on what constitutes good land stewardship, and the responsibility ultimately rests on your head. So you've evaluated geothermal, and you've come to the conclusion that it's obviously a great partner with your family and the ranch.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about oil and gas and the history of the history of Texas, oil and gas and ranching, they've kind of been hand in hand. A lot, I'll be honest with you, a lot of large ranches in Texas have existed because of the oil and gas industry. They've made it profitable for those landowners or mineral owners to be able to hold on to their ranches in good times and in hard times. And now that we are transitioning into a new type of energy, geothermal could be that replacement. Now, of course, in Texas, there are surface owners and there are mineral owners. We happen to be both. Yes, I'm a steward of the land, but I am actually more of a steward to my heirs. And I'll explain that because I, as a manager of McAllen Ranch and the owners, we have a responsibility to each other for the the land to sustain itself. Because if the land cannot sustain itself, then there's a potential for selling the ranch. And I think that is probably the biggest environmental impact or disaster that we could have. These large ranches are important because if there is a time where the ranch becomes a burden and financially, and we have to sell the ranch, then the ranch gets divided, and there's more fences, and there's more water wells, and there's more houses, and more cats and dogs. So we want to maintain what we have, and we think that adding geothermal to all the other enterprises that we run on the ranch will help sustain the ranch for centuries to come.
Couldn't agree with you more. We're going to be watching your project closely and shining a light on what's going on down there. So great work. In order to figure out how Texas ranching can partner with Bitcoin operations and deployment, let's turn our focus to cryptocurrency and energy. There is not a week that goes by without a major multi-million-dollar and in sometimes multi-billion-dollar announcement of a new Bitcoin mining facility or project somewhere in Texas. While the capital investment and economic stimulation is certainly welcome in rural parts of the state, the Bitcoin mining industry has faced some recent scrutiny and challenges associated with heavy energy use and stress on the electricity grid. Quite possibly the best person on earth to talk about this challenge and this opportunity is our next guest, Lanham Napier. Lanham is the co-founder and CEO of BuildGroup Management, an Austin-based venture capital firm. Prior to launching the company, Lanham was the CEO of Rackspace, a small little camp company in San Antonio you may have heard of. He led the company from $1.5 million in revenue to $1.5 billion over a 13-year period. And as a result, he helped create the world leader in cloud service technology and turned Rackspace into one of the 100 best companies to work for in America. He has an MBA from Harvard and a BA from Rice University. So Lanham, clearly you are a slacker and can't seem to hold down a job. So welcome to the world of geothermal.
Yeah, thanks. No, I got so stressed about it, I pulled my hair out.
One of the direct questions that folks are asking is the potential for data centers to be powered by geothermal, thus reducing the potential strain on the grid.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great point, and that's actually what led me to this whole category. So I was super blessed to be part of Rackspace, and we ran a bunch of digital infrastructure. The thing to know about digital infrastructure, it is a power hog. That's a South Texas, ranching term there, power hog. I mean, it sucks up the juice. And so when you think about, 10 years ago, I remember walking around Rackspace and just a thought occurred to me. I mean, we consume megawatts and megawatts of electricity, and I had no idea what really the fuel stock was for it. Then when I started poking around in there, I started realizing, some of that stuff on the East Coast, we had some coal plants. Stuff in Dallas, we had natural gas, which is better. All right. And so what got me thinking about this is, we don't have a base load, reliable green energy source in the country, but for nuclear. And nuclear has its fans, its critics. Look, full disclosure, I'm a fan of nuclear. I think, man, hallelujah, that stuff is basically infinite. And imagine when we get fusion, right? We get to go to Jupiter and back. Okay.
Hey, Lanham, Germany just announced they're trying to turn on their reactors back on because of the challenges they're facing. So nuclear is on the way back in Germany.
Well, I hope so. The challenge we have I toured a number of nuclear plants in the States, and the challenge we have is that supply chain in our country really doesn't exist anymore. And you think about like all the fellows that built those plants, like they may not even be alive. I mean, we've been trying to build one plant for a while in the Southeast. We're, years late, gazillion dollars over budget. So my basic thesis in here is humanity has insatiable thirst for digital infrastructure. We need to have a green baseload amount of energy to feed it. And so, one of the things that led me to this project and this specifically the GT Mac 1 GT Mac 1 is that, how do we build a digital energy campus? So how do we co-locate a hyperscale data center? All that means is just a big one, right, consuming 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts of electricity next to a power generation source that is green. And this is what has led me to geothermal, and I'm super excited about it. I started running geothermal at my house in San Antonio just to save on an air conditioner. Okay, but that's just kind of that's tinkering. I mean, the stuff that's going on here with Sage and the project in Starr County, when we think about building a 300 megawatt geothermal plant, I mean, that's part of the industry revolution. So I'm super pumped to have a chance to work on that, build a data center next to it one day. That's just how the world ought to operate.
That's awesome. And I would imagine these folks that are making these investments in these Bitcoin startups are paying close attention to power supply and resiliency and reliability to these investments that they're making. So it looks like geothermal is coming online or coming down the road at the exact right time for pairing it with data centers. So
yeah, and I think so. In the Bitcoin thing, Bitcoin's a risk asset, and so right now there's a whole lot of work that's got to done to help that market reach a point of equilibrium. There's it reminds me of 20 years ago when we had this excess capacity of data centers. We now live in a world with an excess capacity of Bitcoin miners relative to price. So, the market's going to sort that. The market's this amazing force to sort those kinds of things, right? And when it does, I think the opportunity will be to figure out, how to arbitrage this geothermally generated electron. Do we turn it into a digital asset like a Bitcoin? Do we turn it into another piece of software? Do we sell it into the grid? We will be reaching a world where, we have enough green energy electrons, assuming success with geothermal, that we can arbitrage that electron into highest best use. And that's super geeky and super cool.
Awesome. Well, now we're going to turn our focus to our national defense and energy infrastructure and the need for our military installations to be immune from external disruptions has never been greater. The Department of Defense is currently the largest energy consumer globally. By reducing demand and reliance on petroleum, and by embracing the potential of new energy resources and technology like geothermal, our military can maintain its mission readiness and adapt to future energy challenges. Joining our panel is Colonel Martin Salinas. Colonel Salinas, whose call sign is Riddler, is the Chief Operations Officer for AFWERX, which is the research and development arm of the United States Air Force. Recently, the Air Force selected Sage Geosystems and the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology to carry out a feasibility study on the deployment of closed-loop geothermal energy systems to supply clean and secure power for Joint Base Ellington in Houston, Texas. Colonel, could you please tell us, without having to kill us, what AFWERX is working on? Nothing top secret, but why does the military like geothermal? What can other bases learn from the project at Ellington? And most importantly, why is your call sign name Riddler?
We'll start with Riddler, I guess. So I like to think that I got that call sign because of my intellectual curiosity in the use of the Socratic method. But I think when I was a young lieutenant, I just asked so many questions, I drove people crazy. So they said, "Get this Riddler out of here." So that's essentially what happened. That's at least the 10% truth. So, but yeah, so thank you for having us on. And man, has it been? I've been in this seat in Austin, out of the AFWERX hub there in Central Texas, and man, it has been great. I'm impressed to see what Texas is getting after. Part of what you described with Sage is also a partnership with the Texas Air National Guard. And some of the great work that the Texas Military Department has worked on in partnership with AFWERX and a lot of the capabilities we're putting out there. So it has been great. So part of our job as an AFWERX, we are nestled within the Air Force Research Lab. We have a charge to go out and essentially tech scout, look for leading edge capability. We invest those, not really invest, but we apply those funds across the board, that small business innovation and research dollars that we have to find these capabilities where we can iterate and build upon capability that we already have, but also explore novel solutions. So we've got that exploration space. Ultimately, though, at the end of the day, getting after the Secretary of the Air Force's imperatives are important to us. One of those imperatives is resilient basing. And you nailed it on your description on the introduction. I mean, resilient basing helps us both not only in our sustainability inside the United States, but whenever we move and we have to do expeditionary basing outside of the US. You can imagine a little easier to have resilience in the US, but as you move outside to other areas, more remote locations, that becomes a bigger challenge. So having resilient, sustainable options is a strategic imperative, right? It's a national defense imperative for us, and something that we find obviously very interesting. Geothermal is one of those, and I think from not only from our good stewards of energy within the U.S., probably more likely a fixed site capability, but still very important, helping us relieve some of the I think the capabilities that we already have to enhance them. And we're seeing some really good movement there. I know there's going to be a site at Ellington Field. I had the chance the other day to check out sort of the heat map for the areas where you could potentially put these and provide some really good value. And interestingly enough, there are some significant military bases in those areas. So a lot of potential there to help us. And I'll say geothermal, excellent. But even for us, it's one of many interesting solutions. And Lam brought this up. Portable reactors, super interesting to me also. When I talk about moving out to locations elsewhere, I imagine a world where we have that capability, and something we're looking into. The Defense Innovation Unit from the DoD's innovation capacity is interested in looking at those things. I've got off the phone this morning with some folks from other services. Again, this is an exciting time. I think geothermal is a great step where we'll see a lot of near-term value on something that's very achievable, where not only does the military get some value from the money we put into that, but also it's a dual use capability that our everyday Texans or everyday US citizens also find value. So we get that sort of dual win like that. We're very happy to participate.
Awesome. Our final panelist is Mark Vega, the General Manager of the Public Utility System in McAllen, Texas. Mark is on the front line of disaster preparedness and response when a hurricane or winter storm knocks out power for millions of Texans living in the Rio Grande Valley. In short, reliable energy supply is his number one concern. The city of McAllen and Sage Geosystems have had initial discussions about how geothermal systems may be able to provide electrical power from an independent microgrid to reduce the cost of water desalination that the city of McAllen has been evaluating for years. Mark, let me ask you a couple of questions. One, what can municipalities gain by engaging in geothermal? And two, how did McAllen get interested in geothermal energy?
Well, let me take the first one, Matt. And first of all, thank you all for allowing me to be here. And I really apologize that I joined you all a little bit late. Sorry about that. But the first question, so what do we benefit? We benefit a tremendous amount. So if you all don't know where McAllen, Texas is, we are at the far south of Texas. We are 15 minutes from the Mexican border with the border town of Reynosa. Reynosa is easily over 1 million people. And so we provide all water and wastewater services to the city of McAllen. City of McAllen is about 160,000, 150 to 160,000 people. But it's really the hub here in Hidalgo County and really RGV. A lot of folks come here to play, to dine, to visit, and to work. And so the major power needs, energy needs, are going to be with the utility. They're going to be with the water plants, the wastewater plants. And so what do we stand to benefit? We all know what the power grids are capable of, both on the beneficial side and on the negative side. And so now extreme weather events, whether cold or hot, really put the grid in some shaky ground like we saw this past year. Right now, we have consistently hit temperatures over 100, 102 degrees every day. And there's always the threats of brownouts or blackouts or just load shedding. You can't do that in a utility. The city has got to have a pressured water system no matter what at all times, 24/7. Wastewater as well. You've got to be treating water and wastewater. And what geothermal does is it gives you the ability to not depend on external forces. And that's huge in a utility. I mean, that is just when somebody calls you and says, we may need to load shed and you may need to come down. That's, we take that personally and we take that very, very seriously. So that's just not an option. It's just not an option. And thank God it doesn't happen very often, but when that threat is there, it's a real threat. So that's what it does. I mean, there's several factors, there's several benefits, but the biggest one is to be in control of your own destiny, so to speak. Number two, we have 4 treatment plants, each average about $500,000 a year in electrical charges. So that's about $2 million a year for all 4 plants. So it's a matter of economics as well for us. Now, the initial cost, if we were to undertake that project, that'd be a high capital cost. But we can maybe talk later about the options, but Sage has been great to work with. We love what Sage is doing. They're doing it right in our backyard here in Starr County, about 30, 40 minutes from where we're at here. And it's hard to get a public utility board excited. I mean, it's really hard. We deal in water and sewer. They're excited. They're really excited about this, at the potential of saving money in the long term, the potential of controlling our own destiny and not be subject to external forces that may interrupt services. Those are the two big ones. So, we're looking forward to it. The reliability factor, the cost factor, we're really looking forward to it. And what makes it, one thing I failed to mention is we've been looking at this for years. I had the opportunity to attend a geothermal conference at SMU some years back. SMU has probably one of the best geothermal departments, from what I understand, in the United States. And so the gentleman giving the presentation, I was in a room full of, I don't know, must have been 300, 400 people in that presentation, but there were 2 really optimal locations in the state of Texas, one of them being here in Hidalgo County, the other being, I believe it was in Pleasant Bayou, East Texas. But it's just, we're sitting on a geothermal pocket that's much more accessible or shallow, so to speak, than other areas of Texas, than the vast majority of Texas. So we really, really want to take advantage of that. That would be fantastic. So it's not just about us, it's about the next generation and being good stewards. That's what we're in the business of. It's not our resource, water's not our resource, but we are the stewards of that resource for a big community at this time right now. So we take that very, very seriously.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Let me just point out that I predict the city of McAllen is going to make geothermal history in the near future. And it's going to be a beacon for the United States in terms of municipal engagement in geothermal production. Let me just also point out that we're in Texas in the middle of hurricane season. And for half of the population of Texas, which is close to the coast and inland, we just don't know what the next week will bring. And as we have seen in years past, it can be catastrophic. So it makes the resiliency and weatherproofing characteristics of geothermal all the more important. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward. Well, I think I'm going to turn it over to audience question and answers. If anybody has any questions they want to chime in on, I'll be happy to facilitate those. Well, it must have been everybody's lunch break and we've lulled everybody to sleep. So anyway, here we go. All right. So how can we get this going in other states? Speaking for the Texas Geothermal Energy Alliance, we have started interacting with our colleagues in Colorado already, Idaho soon, and I think, as everybody knows, the data point, the city of Boise has had a geothermal loop, I think, for 120 years. We know that geothermal is up and running in California, Nevada, El Paso. What is the magic formula for making this work in other states? I'll throw that out to James.
Well, I think of course, I'm not the engineer, I'm the rancher, but I would have to say that it's dependent on the geology. So at McAllen Ranch, we're targeting areas that are in the Vicksburg and the Wilcox shale. Now, I don't know if those same formations exist in other parts of the United States. I probably doubt it, but I'm sure that there's a level of a type of rock, sand, or porosity in the geology that's needed in order to make what Sage Geosystems is putting together at McAllen Ranch. So I would have to defer to the engineers at Sage.
Well, let me just observe that I think with all the technological advancements that are on the horizon and some of the companies that have been represented this week, I think in very short order, breakthroughs in technology will allow geothermal in areas much wider than currently available. So
let me add to that. We're targeting temperatures that are well over 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So, heat exists everywhere, as we know. It just at what depth does it exist at? So I think it's we're moving forward with the idea that we can put these systems anywhere throughout the world. So I think it's just a matter of finding where that geology is and knowing how deep you have to go in order to get it.
Yeah, I guess what I would add, Matt, to that, I think it's sort of, things need to go from a project to a playbook to a process. And right now, what we have going on in South Texas is a project. There's a project with McAllen Ranch, with Sage, to prove this 3 megawatt pilot for geothermal. Once we have a successful project, then I would think we can create a playbook around it. And once we do that a few times, we can create a process to make it easier for these to know the variables and know what the technology has to be applied and know who can do it to make it easier for these other states to roll it out. I mean, we're in the hard part now. This is the innovative invent mode. Once we get past that, then we can deploy this other places. So as Colonel Salinas, the Riddler's working on, he's proven this at, Joint Air Base now. Well, once he proves it there, it's just a lot easier to take it to other bases with similar characteristics. So I think it's, making these projects works reduces the risk, doesn't eliminate it, but it reduces it. And with a lower risk, it's a lot easier for things to get mass adoption.
Yeah, and I'll add to what Lanham said. We've always kind of viewed McAllen Ranch as sort of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. So we're starting there, and because we think it has the highest potential for success. So once getting that established, then as Lanham said, we'll perfect this process.
James, let me obviously take note of your comment about the resource. The geology has to be right. But let me expound on a benefit or a leg up that Texas has on the rest of the country. I have my TexGea hat on right now. But we have a very free market, pro-commerce, pro-economic development regulatory framework in Texas. I have been reading news clips about environmental permitting challenges, federal tribal land challenges, endangered species challenges to geothermal development in other states. That just doesn't happen in Texas because of our regulatory framework around private property and the fact that somebody else can't tell you how you want to do business on your land. So I think Texas is well suited for the future because of its regulatory framework, and it's kind of a pro-business attitude. As the governor of Texas would say, we're rolling out the welcome mat for businesses in Texas.
I agree. Texas, I think, is a perfect place to lead the way for this. And Texas has some of the cheapest energy in the United States. You know, electricity prices are some of the cheapest in the U.S. As compared to, say, California or New York or New Jersey. You know, so we also feel that if we can get this done in Texas, we can make this work anywhere. You know, this is a great place to start. And Texas has some of the most private land ownership there is in the United States. You know, we're very fortunate here in Texas to have so much private land ownership and to have the freedoms that we do.
As you can imagine, some audience members are very excited about the prospect of a 300 megawatt project. One of their questions is, where is the power going for that project? Is it a data center? And what about the grid connections for remote ranches? For instance, that's where the question about other states came up. Can we get this going in Montana or Idaho?
Well, the phase 1 project, the pilot project, it was 3 megawatts, as I mentioned, and that would be connected to a local substation with the local electrical utility. And we would be providing power to the local utility with the pilot project. As we begin to scale up, then we would be connecting that directly into the Texas grid.
And am I correct in observing that this would be the first time that a geothermal source has provided power to the grid?
Yes, this is the first one, which is incredibly exciting.
That it certainly is.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to defense and national security. Martin mentioned remote bases. What do the logistics look like for bringing in a rig on forward operating bases? For instance, is geothermal being considered in that context? I think you touched on it briefly, but I was wondering if you could expound on, I guess, overseas deployment, forward operating bases, and the potential there.
Yeah, there's always potential, right? And I think, you know, the kind of organization I'm from, you know, we're always looking at every potential possibility. And I believe I've had this conversation with Dr. Wissian, you know, retired Major General Dr. Wissian, who's also heading up this project at University of Texas. You know, it's probably the as you all mentioned, the low-hanging fruit is within the U.S., right, where we know those heat maps are that tell us where some of the ideal depths are for this sort of capability. It doesn't exclude areas overseas. I think from it really just depends on how you look at it. From an Air Force perspective, you know, we look at basing. We typically are a little bit more long-term, right? Once we establish an air base somewhere, we're going to be there a little while. We don't necessarily, you know, need to be. We'd like to be more mobile, and we are definitely heading in that direction. But once we establish that base there, you know, I think there's potential to be there for a while. I don't have the numbers for how quickly. You know, get the mobilization of a rig would definitely be something we would be thinking about. Like how much does it take to get you know, the necessary equipment to where we're going, and then how long are we going to be there, right? I mean, if we're picking locations and moving in a matter of months, that'll drive that, you know, that equation. But again, from an air-based perspective, not necessarily. I think the true value there once Again, Lanham, you mentioned it, you brought it up great, you know, like proving out the concept, and then, you know, moving on from there where you get to process. I think right now we're definitely in the exploration area here of experimentation, proving out concepts. It will be interesting to look at how you you know, from an expeditionary perspective, how you would potentially deploy that capability out to a distant location, how fast you could set up a rig and get operating. And then go from there. The interesting thing about that is I don't imagine we're going to set something up like that and then take it down, take it with us, perhaps. And I think from again, steward capacity, we're probably in somebody's backyard and bringing them some very interesting capability that brings value to their community, right?
Absolutely.
That's very important for us to do.
And one question on that, Martin, I'm curious. So I'm not sure I'm allowed to ask questions, but we're going for it. Like, what is, you know, James talks about 300 megawatt. That is a macro thing. You know, what's also interesting here is that we can get a form factor where geothermal is capable on a micro basis.
Yeah.
You know, maybe all the way down to a residence. But like, what is it? I would assume a base is somewhere in between that.
Yeah, I don't have all the numbers with me. We've talked about this in what are the levels of interesting energy application in kilowatts before. I don't want to get too deep into that, but I will say anything is helpful, right? So even if I can offset the energy capacity, because some of these bases that we have do have their own energy production, right? So if I can, and some are old, they're oil and they're oil or coal or whatever, fuel or coal. And if we can reduce that dependency just a little bit, provide them a little bit more resiliency, some alternative options, that's always helpful. So there's interest here. I think Ellington is probably one of the first stops as far as this project goes from a military perspective. I have some eyes on some areas, and I'm working with some of our basing authorities on, and they're interested too. Water and energy utilities in general, resilience is important. Looking at what the base of the future looks like is something we're interested in. So I think, if I had a base with several different types, that's still helpful, right? So I had a little bit of, reactor, I had a little bit of traditional, legacy in there for the time being, but I'm offsetting the necessity to go at full capacity at the, the generator that's already there. That's still helpful.
Mark, I want to turn to you in the city of McAllen. Can you put a value on the baseload capability of geothermal to provide steady output? Because I would imagine that you're willing to pay a premium for the assurance of steady power and output. Or is that an assumption on my part?
Yeah, that's an assumption. That's an assumption. And I'll tell you why, Matt, because like I said, the value for us would be $2 million a year right now. 5 years from now, our plants would have to be expanded because of the growth of McAllen. We'd probably be looking at $2.5 million. 10 years from now, it could be $3 million a year. But the reason I say it's an assumption is because, we are governed by a board of directors, and those board of directors are elected officials. And elected officials answer to the citizens. And a lot of times, they're the ones that bear the responsibility of, well, we need a rate increase and we need to charge $2 a month more on your utility bill, or $3 a month more on your utility bill. And those are, we always have to keep that in mind. Our board is just fantastic. They always look at the person on a fixed income, the 75, 85-year-olds on a Social Security check, and how does our rate increase impact them. And I'm glad that they do that, because water is not like cable. It's not an option. That's a necessity. And you have to shower, you have to cook, you have to clean, and you have to water your plants, or whatever that may be. And so they're very sensitive to that. And so, and that's why I say that it's an assumption, is because we have to do our part in educating the public. If that's the case, that we are going to go ahead and they will pay slightly more on a monthly basis. Those are definitely things that education is key. Information is key, and they want to know the why. Especially in days like today, when, I'll just give you an example. With the heat that we've been seeing, our water consumption should be more than what we are producing right now. So we're averaging about 32, 33 million gallons a day in the city of McAllen. We should be at about 36, 37. And we're just shaking our heads as to, what that reason is. But we think it's, what we think it is a lot of people are not irrigating their lawns like they used to, because that money's going to fill up a gas tank right now.
Right.
Or at the grocery store. And so, that plays a part in our revenues, is that decrease in water consumption. So the way that you do these projects, you've got to be able to fund them. If you borrow, you've got to be able to pay that back, and your finances have to be in order. So that's why, I say it's an assumption, because a lot of it is educating the public as to why this need is not a want, it's a need.
Well, it's incumbent upon the geothermal industry to provide a product that is affordable to the market. And so that's what we're doing today. That's what we're doing this week. We are working toward a common goal of providing geothermal where it doesn't currently exist. to folks who run municipal governments and any other energy user. I'm going to turn to one other question. We just got a major thank you to these panelists for leading the way and having the courage to get out there and lead. Mark, you're one of the first and only really cities that I've heard talking about geothermal. And we're kind of wondering if you'd like to consider hosting other cities to share your institutional knowledge on moving forward on geothermal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We would love to do that. You know, what's better for McAllen, what's good for McAllen is good for the whole Rio Grande Valley. And it's a very rapidly growing area that's quickly becoming like a metroplex. I mean, we used to see, there's a Google image, a nighttime Google image that shows the intensity of the lights of a community. And it used to be very fragmented from McAllen or Starr County down to the island to Brownsville. Now it's a string of lights because of the growth. And so, you know, we already sell water to neighboring communities, east of us, north of us, south of us. We love to be a regional provider. We just love to help our neighbors. I think that's why McAllen's been so successful, because it's not just about us. It's about who can we help around us. And so geothermal, you know, gosh, that would be just like we sell water. Maybe we could one day supply power needs to our neighbor, you know, with geothermal, which would be fantastic.
Well, I would imagine that we're going to be knocking on your door pretty soon with some of those opportunities. Let me see if I can wrap things up by asking everybody to sum up in about a minute or less. Anything you want to add to the discussion that we may have missed or not touched on enough? And I'd like to hear what you think the future of geothermal energy looks like in the next 5 years in your various sectors. We'll start with in order that we introduced. And so, James, we'll go to you first.
Well, the future of geothermal will begin at McAllen Ranch with MacGT1.
and the Texas tourism industry will follow shortly thereafter.
That's right. That's right. We'll cook you a steak too and give you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Lana.
Look, I think that the 5 years from now, you're going to start with James's place, the Mac GT1, and we'll have our playbook. You know, we may not be all the way to process to where we can really roll it, but we'll have a playbook, and there'll be multiple sites under construction. And I think that, to me, the point to add to that is just, we are living in a world that clearly needs a diversity of energy sources, and we got to increase the supply. This is a heck of an innovation to do that. And I love, it would be amazing if, the great state of Texas, this hydrocarbon heaven, turns around and creates baseload green energy for the planet. I mean, that would be like, God bless America kind of stuff.
Well, Lanham, I'm going to share with you the TexGeo marketing slogan that we've adopted. We used to be for all of the above, and now we're for all of the above and below. So we know
nice.
That geothermal.
Catchy. Yeah.
Colonel, why don't you share with us your closing comments and what the future of geothermal looks like for the Department of Defense and the Air Force?
Yeah, so I hope Lanham's right. I hope in 4 to 5 years we look back and this is part of the playbook, right? We've talked about it now. We're doing it then. And the other part that I think is interesting. I mean, thank you for having me on this panel, because it goes to show one of the interesting, I think, places that we're looking into from a DoD perspective is partnership with the industry, right? So a little bit of that public-private partnership to bring not only value to what we're getting after, but again, that capability that also brings value to our civilian citizens out there. So I think that's important. I would love to see that in 5 years from now, that again, not only is the playbook established for this, but we look back and say that, hey, we need to get after more of those kind of commercial DoD partnerships and getting after capability that brings value to both players. So again, I think we're heading in that direction. I'm pretty confident we'll get there.
Great. Mark, your thoughts on the future of geothermal in Texas?
Well, I'll give you a quick example, Matt. Maybe it breaks down at some point, but for example, right now, a lot of the state of Texas is in drought mode, and drought mode, typically people start thinking about groundwater wells immediately. And then they go and get funding to dig groundwater wells. And then a storm blows through, fills up the reservoirs, and then it's back on the back burner. But you've got to find a way to diversify your water portfolio, just like you do your energy portfolio. So 5 years from now, I think at minimum, it has to be part of your energy portfolio and grow from there. So I think that's the realistic perspective that we've got.
All right. Well, that wraps up our panel for today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us and being a part of the geothermal future. And we hope to see you soon.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.